The rabbit's terror was a high, sharp scream in her mind, a frantic pulse of pure panic that beat against her skull. Brenna didn't move. She remained crouched behind the thick trunk of a frosted pine, the cold of the bark seeping through her worn leather jacket, her breath plumed in the frigid mountain air, a ghost of her own existence. "Run! Run! Faster! It's coming!" The rabbit's thoughts were not words, but raw, primal feelings, images of shadow and teeth and an ending. Brenna let out her own breath, a slow, controlled stream. Her fingers, numb with cold, tightened on the grip of her bow. She wasn't the shadow the rabbit feared, but she was its fate all the same. She loosed the arrow. It flew true, a silent streak of death that ended the rabbit's panic in a single, final thud. Silence. The sudden absence of the creature's fear left a hollow space in her head. It was always like this. The echoes. She heard the inner voices of the animals, the low, rumbling contentment of the bears in their dens, the sharp, hungry cunning of the fox on the prowl, and sometimes, deeper in the woods, she heard the wolves. Their echoes were different, complex, layered with memory and instinct, like a song sung in a language she almost understood. A new echo brushed against her consciousness now, not from an animal, but from a lone gray wolf perched on the ridge above. It wasn't thinking of hunger, it was remembering. A flicker of an ancient battle, the clash of silver on bone, a woman with hair like spun moonlight standing before a tide of darkness. Brenna shook her head, trying to dislodge the image. These fragments were getting stronger, more frequent. They felt less like stray thoughts and more like deliberate messages she couldn't quite decipher. A ghost of a memory, her own this time, surfaced. She was 5 years old. The air smelled of smoke and burning pine. Her mother, Isabel, was kneeling in front of her, her beautiful face streaked with soot. Her hands were firm on Brenna's small shoulders. "Remember who you are," her mother had whispered, her voice a desperate plea. Then, she was gone, swallowed by fire and screams. 16 years. 16 years of living in this isolated cabin with Sage, the woman who had pulled her from the wreckage of her old life. 16 years of questions that were met with silence, of a part of herself that felt caged, snarling just beneath her skin. She slung the rabbit over her shoulder and began the trek back. The cabin was a small, dark shape against the snow, a plume of smoke curling from its stone chimney. Inside, Sage would be tending to her herbs, her face a mask of serene neutrality that Brenna had learned to resent. As she stepped through the door, the warmth of the hearth wrapped around her, but it did little to thaw the ice in her soul. Sage looked up from the bundle of dried wolfsbane she was tying. "A good hunt," she said, her voice calm, as always. "It was quiet," Brenna replied, dropping the rabbit onto the wooden preparation table. "Too quiet." Sage's fingers stilled. "The moon is full tonight. The forest is holding its breath." Brenna scoffed, turning to face her guardian. "Is that what you call it? I call it waiting. Something is coming. Sage, I can feel it. The wild wolves are gathering closer than they ever have." "You should not listen to their echoes. Brenna, it is dangerous." "What isn't dangerous?" Brenna shot back, her voice rising. "Living in hiding, not knowing who I am, not knowing why a part of me feels like it's being held in a cage." She slammed her fist on the table, making the dried herbs jump. "Why can't I change? Sage, every other person with our blood can shift. Why am I broken?" Sage's face, usually so composed, softened with a pain that Brenna rarely saw. "You are not broken, child. You are protected." Protected from what? The truth? Before Sage could answer, a wave of agony seized Brenna. It started deep in her bones, a white-hot fire that spread through her veins. It felt like her skeleton was trying to break free of her skin. She cried out, collapsing to her knees, her back arching. The wolf inside her, the wolf she could feel but never become, was throwing itself against the walls of its prison, a desperate, frantic battering for freedom. "It's the moon," she gasped, clutching her stomach. "It's getting worse." Sage was at her side in an instant, a small pouch in her hand. She uncorked a vial and pressed it to Brenna's lips. The liquid was bitter, tasting of earth and sleep. "Breathe, child, just breathe," Sage began to chant in a low, ancient tongue, her hand glowing with a soft, silver light as she pressed it against Brenna's forehead. The magic seeped into her, a cool balm on the fire, forcing the struggling beast back into its cage. The pain receded, leaving Brenna shaking and slick with sweat on the cold wooden floor. She looked up at Sage, her vision blurry. "That was magic," she whispered, the accusation clear in her tone. "You're a witch." Sage didn't deny it. She merely looked down at Brenna with infinite sadness. "I am what I need to be to keep you safe." "Safe," Brenna's voice cracked. "You call this safe? I'm a prisoner in my own body. Sage, and you know why. You've always known." "The less you know, Brenna," Sage said, her voice a solemn vow, "the safer you are." But it was already too late for safety. As the last of the pain faded, a new sound reached them from the forest outside. Not one wolf, but dozens. They weren't howling, they were gathering, a silent, menacing ring around their tiny cabin. And through the chorus of their tense, waiting echoes, a single, clear thought cut through the night, a voice carried on the wind that seemed to speak directly to her soul. "They're coming for you, last daughter." 3 days earlier, at Iron Peak Castle. Cade Ashford, Alpha King of the 5 territories, stood before his war council. The room was cold, all gray stone and hard shadows, much like the faces staring back at him. He held himself with the rigid stillness of a predator, but it was a carefully constructed facade. Inside, a fracture was spreading through his soul. His skin, usually warmed by the vigor of his wolf, was pale. The vibrant amber of his eyes would, at times, flicker and dim as if a light was being slowly extinguished. He could feel his wolf, a great gray beast of immense power, pacing at the edges of his consciousness, but the tether connecting them was fraying. Sometimes, when he tried to call on its strength, the shift would fail, stalling midway in an explosion of agony that left him breathless and weak. "There are only 57 days until the blood eclipse," his beta, Rowan Pierce, reported, his voice low and grim. "The healers have found no cure. The mages of the Silver Circle offer nothing but riddles. If we cannot find a way to stop this soul fracture." Rowan didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what would happen. Cade would lose his wolf, then his life, and the crown would pass to his cousin, Damian Blackwood. The thought of Damian on the throne, with his casual cruelty and belief in rule by fear, was a colder dread than death itself. Damian, who was present, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Perhaps it is time to consider a peaceful transition of power, cousin, for the good of the kingdom, of course." Cade's gaze snapped to him, a flicker of the old fire burning in his eyes. "The kingdom is my responsibility. I will not abandon it." As he spoke, a tremor of pain shot up his spine, and he gripped the arm of his throne to keep from showing it. But he saw the glint of satisfaction in Damian's eyes. He had seen it. It was then that Victoria Cross, the high priestess of the Silver Circle, stepped forward. She was an ageless woman with eyes as silver as her title, wrapped in robes the color of midnight. "There is one legend," she said, her voice a silken whisper that commanded attention. "A myth about a bloodline thought to be extinct, the first pack. It is said they carried a unique magic, and one among them was known as the Echo Keeper, one who could hear the very soul of a wolf." A heavy silence fell over the room. The first pack was a forbidden topic, a story of betrayal and death. "According to the prophecy," Victoria continued, her silver eyes fixed on Cade. Only the blood of the first pack can mend a fractured soul, and there is only one person left who carries it, the daughter of Marcus and Isabel Thorne. The name hit Cade like a physical blow, a cold, familiar guilt twisted in his gut. "The Thornes were traitors," he said, his voice flat and hard. "My father executed them. I watched him do it." The memory was a scar on his soul, the sight of the flames, the smell of fear, the chilling finality of his father's command. "Your father executed them," Victoria corrected smoothly. "And that, Your Majesty, is precisely why only their daughter can save you. Fate has a cruel sense of poetry. You must atone for the sins of your father." Back in the Black Ridge Mountains, present day, they came not with aggression, but with an unnerving, silent efficiency. Rowan Pierce and 4 of the king's elite warriors materialized from the snowy woods, forming a loose but inescapable perimeter around the cabin. Sage met them on the porch, a wooden staff held tight in her hand. "There's no one here for you," she said, her voice betraying none of the fear Brenna could feel churning inside her. The man in the lead, Rowan, had a kind face, but his eyes held the weary resolve of a man on an impossible mission. "I can smell your fear, Sage Whitlock, and I can smell her scent. Faint though it is, I know you're hiding her." He took a step forward. "My king is dying. Our world is on the brink of falling into the hands of a tyrant. We need Brenna Thorne." Brenna didn't wait for Sage to be threatened. She pushed the cabin door open and stepped out into the cold, her bow held loosely at her side. She met the beta's gaze without flinching. "I'm here." Rowan's eyes widened slightly. He had been expecting a girl. Perhaps. Not the hardened young woman who stood before him, her eyes carrying a storm of their own. "Why?" Brenna asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Should I help the son of the man who murdered my parents?" The question hung in the frozen air. It was the question Rowan had dreaded, the one for which there was no easy answer. "Because if you don't," he said, his voice earnest and low, "thousands of innocent people will suffer under a reign far worse than Aldrich Ashford's ever was. Cade is not his father. He has spent the last 3 years trying to undo the damage Aldrich caused." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "And because there are truths about your parents' deaths that only Alpha King Cade knows. Truths he has kept secret for 16 years. That was the hook, the one thing she couldn't resist, the truth. It was the ghost that had haunted every day of her life. Sage turned to her, her voice a barely audible whisper. "If you go, you will learn everything you have ever wanted to know. But that truth, Brenna, it could destroy you." Brenna looked from Sage's worried face to the solemn beta and his warriors. She looked out at the silent, watching forest. She had lived in the shadows for 16 years, haunted by echoes of the past. It was time to face the light, no matter how blinding. "I am already destroyed," she said softly. "At least this way, I'll know why." She straightened her shoulders and looked at Rowan. "I'll go with you, on one condition." "Anything," he promised. "I want everything, every secret, every hidden detail, no more lies." Rowan nodded gravely. "You have the king's word." As they prepared to leave, Brenna saw Sage slip back inside the cabin. From a distance, through the small window, she saw her guardian pull a blood-soaked, ancient-looking charm from beneath a loose floorboard. Sage clutched it to her chest, her lips moving in a silent, sorrowful prayer. "Forgive me, Isabel," she whispered to the empty room. "I kept her safe as long as I could." And far in the distance, hidden deep within the shadows of the pines, a pair of eyes watched the group depart. They belonged to a wolf, as black as coal, a silent observer in a game whose rules were only just beginning to be revealed. The journey to Iron Peak Castle was a 3-day ordeal of biting wind and endless forests. For Brenna, It was like stepping into another world. She had known only the isolation of her mountain. Now, they passed through small villages, where the scent of wood smoke mingled with the tangible anxiety of the people. Their echoes were a low, constant hum of worry beneath the surface of their daily lives. Rowan tried to bridge the chasm of silence between them. He rode beside her, offering small observations about the land. But Brenna met his attempts with a cold wall of her own. She answered his questions with curt, tactical replies and asked none in return. She was an ally of circumstance, not a friend. The first night, they made camp in a sheltered clearing. Brenna lay in her bedroll, feigning sleep, and listened. She focused on the echoes of the pack wolves patrolling the royal lands. Their thoughts were sharper, more disciplined than the wild wolves she was used to. The king is dying. The darkness spreads. Damien Blackwood circles like a vulture. Pray the rumors are true. Pray she is the one. One of the warriors on watch, a young man with a fresh scar on his cheek, noticed the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. "Did you hear something?" he asked, his hand drifting to the hilt of his sword. Brenna's eyes snapped open. "Just the wind," she lied, her heart pounding. On the second day, Rowan tried a different approach. "He's not like his father," he said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You need to know that. When Aldrich died, the kingdom celebrated. But Cade mourned, not for the man, but for the king he should have been. He spent 3 years fixing what was broken. He pardoned hundreds who were wrongfully imprisoned, rebuilt villages his father's taxes had starved. He tried to heal the wounds." "He didn't pardon my parents," Brenna stated, the words tasting like ash. Rowan's expression was pained, because when Cade took the throne, they had been dead for 13 years. But he did try to find you. He sent scouts, trackers. He wanted to offer restitution, to apologize. A tiny crack appeared in the armor around her heart, but she refused to let it show. An apology was a hollow gesture for a life that had been stolen. That night, she was woken by a howl. It wasn't the sound of the pack. It was older, wilder, a lone voice calling out in the dark, drawn by an instinct she didn't understand. She slipped out of the camp and walked toward the edge of the trees. A massive, silver-furred wolf stood there, unafraid. It watched her with intelligent, ancient eyes. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a messenger. A clear, powerful thought resonated directly in her mind, a voice that was both masculine and ancient. "You carry her blood, her burden, her destiny." Before she could form a question, Rowan appeared at her side, his sword half drawn. "Get back, Brenna." The wolf gave her one last meaningful look before melting back into the shadows. "Wild wolves never come this close to a camp," Rowan breathed, staring at the spot where it had vanished. He turned to look at her, a strange, speculative light in his eyes. Unless they have a reason. On the third day, they saw it. Iron Peak Castle. It wasn't a fairy tale palace, it was a fortress, a brutalist monument of gray stone clawing at the sky. It was magnificent and terrifying, radiating an aura of grim, ancient power. As they rode through the main gates, a wave of collective emotion washed over Brenna, so potent it almost knocked her from her saddle. It was the fear and desperation of thousands of souls, all tied to the fate of one man. The sheer volume of the echoes was dizzying. "There are so many voices," she whispered, swaying. Rowan steadied her with a hand on her arm. "You're okay. We're here now." She wasn't led to the great hall, filled with lords and ladies who would stare and whisper. Instead, Rowan guided her up a winding staircase to the king's private wing. The air here was thick with a palpable sense of pain. He stood with his back to them, staring out a tall, arched window at the snow-dusted mountains beyond. His posture was unnaturally rigid, the silence in the room heavy and absolute. When he finally turned, Brenna's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps not yet 30. He was beautiful, but not in a soft or gentle way. His was a harsh, chiseled beauty, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, like a king carved from the very stone of his castle. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of liquid amber, but they were flickering, fading at the edges. She could feel the struggle within him, not as an echo, but as a strange, invisible cord that seemed to stretch between them, vibrating with his agony. "Thank you for coming, Brenna Thorne," he said. His voice was a low, rough baritone, like rocks grinding together. "I didn't come out of kindness," she replied, her own voice colder than she intended. "I came for answers." "And you will have them," Cade said. He took a step toward her, and then another. And then he did something that shattered her composure completely. He went down on one knee. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf on the continent, was kneeling before her. His gaze never left hers, and in the depths of his amber eyes, she saw not pride, but a profound, soul-deep regret. "I am sorry, Bent," he said, the words raw and unadorned. "For my father's crimes, for what you lost, for the fact that I can never undo it. I am sorry." Her carefully constructed walls trembled. She had expected arrogance, demands, perhaps even threats. She had never expected this. "An apology won't bring them back," she managed to say, her throat tight. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "But the truth might grant you peace. And if you help me, I swear on my soul, I will tell you everything, even the parts I have never spoken aloud to anyone." He rose to his feet, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "You should see," he said grimly. He closed his eyes, concentrating. A ripple went through him, a grotesque, partial transformation. The bones in his right arm snapped and reformed into the shape of a wolf's leg, covered in coarse gray fur. But it stopped there. He cried out, a sound of pure agony, and staggered back against the wall, clutching his half-formed limb. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she couldn't name, Brenna rushed forward. She reached out and touched his arm, the human part, just above the mangled shift. The moment her skin made contact with his, a brilliant flash of blue-white light erupted between them. Cade gasped, not in pain, but in shock. The tension in his body eased, the agony in his eyes receding for a precious second. The connection was like a live wire, a jolt of pure energy that left her breathless and trembling. They stared at each other, stunned into silence. What did you do?" Cade whispered, his voice full of disbelief. "I don't know," Brenna breathed, pulling her hand back as if burned. At that moment, the door opened, and the High Priestess, Victoria Cross, swept into the room. Her silver eyes glowed with triumph as she took in the scene, the lingering energy in the air, the stunned expressions on their faces. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "Interesting. It seems the prophecy is beginning to fulfill itself." "What prophecy?" Brenna demanded, her head spinning. "That," Victoria said, her smile widening, "is a story for tomorrow. My dear, tonight, you must rest." Cade didn't take his eyes off Brenna. He looked at her with a new, complex expression, a terrifying cocktail of raw hope and profound fear. He had found his only chance at survival, and he had a sinking feeling it was going to cost him more than just his pride. Brenna woke in a bed so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud. Sunlight, a pale winter gold, streamed through a tall window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was larger than the entire cabin she'd grown up in, decorated in rich blues and silvers. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage. A young servant named Mira entered quietly, carrying a tray with breakfast, as she laid out clothes for Brenna, soft wool and leather, A world away from her own patched garments, she spoke in a hushed, nervous tone. "His Majesty thought you might be comfortable here. This was Lady Isabel's room when she would visit the capital." Brenna froze, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. "My mother, she came here." Mira's eyes widened in fear, as if she had said too much. She gave a quick, jerky bow and practically fled the room, leaving Brenna alone with the ghost of her mother. Driven by a restless energy, Brenna began to explore the castle. She felt drawn down a secluded corridor, toward a heavy oak door that was locked tight. A powerful echo emanated from within, a sense of layered history and sorrow. Sage had taught her many things out of necessity, including how to pick a simple lock. The mechanism clicked open under her deft fingers. The room was a dusty archive, filled with scrolls and leather-bound ledgers. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper and forgotten secrets. She found a section labeled with her family's name, Thorn. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a file titled, "The First Pack Incident." The official report was cold and clinical. Marcus and Isabel Thorn, charged with treason, accused of conspiring to steal the sacred power of the Crown Pack for the benefit of the thought-extinct First Pack. But underneath the main text, a line had been written and then furiously crossed out in red ink. She could just make out the words, "Evidence inconclusive. Execution ordered by Alpha King Aldrich despite insufficient proof." "You shouldn't be in here." Brenna spun around, clutching the file to her chest. Rowan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" she challenged, her voice sharp, afraid the truth might interfere with your official story. Rowan let out a long sigh. Stepping into the room, "No, because some truths are more dangerous than the lies." He gestured to the file in her hands. "Cade wants to tell you himself, the right way, when you're ready." Later that day, she was summoned to the highest tower of the castle, the domain of Victoria Cross. The High Priestess's chambers were filled with crystals, charts of the stars, and the scent of strange, sweet incense. Victoria poured her a cup of tea, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I understand you have questions," she began, her silver eyes studying Brenna over the rim of her cup. "I want to know about the prophecy," Brenna said bluntly. "The prophecy of the last daughter," Victoria clarified. "It foretells that when an Alpha King of the Ashford line is afflicted by the soul fracture, only a descendant of the First Pack can perform the rite of mending, a rite that requires a specific flower that blooms only under a blood eclipse. And a drop of the First Pack's blood—" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the prophecy carries a warning. It says, the last daughter shall choose bind the crown in chains of starlight, or break the world with echoes of the first howl. It implies you have the power to save him, or to destroy everything." Brenna stared at her. "And you think that's me?" "I don't think. My dear, I know," Victoria said with unnerving certainty. "Your mother, Isabel Thorn, was not just a historian's wife. She was the secret alpha of the First Pack, their last true leader. That makes you her sole heir." The world tilted on its axis. "My mother, an alpha. That's impossible. Sage never said—" "Sage was sworn to secrecy by your mother herself, to protect you. There are those who would kill you for the power that runs in your veins." That evening, Cade found her in one of the castle's winter gardens. The air was crisp and cold, the statues dusted with snow. The moonlight cast long, skeletal shadows on the ground. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, his presence a solid, grounding weight in her swirling chaos of thoughts. "My father," Cade began, his voice low and strained, "was terrified of the First Pack. He saw their power not as a gift, but as a threat to his throne. Your father, Marcus, was a brilliant historian. He was uncovering their history, learning their secrets. My father became convinced he was planning an uprising." "And my mother?" Brenna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Isabel was a member of his advisory council. She was respected, brilliant. He trusted her implicitly, Cade said, a bitter irony in his tone. He never knew she was the very thing he feared most, not until it was too late. Too late for what? The agony in Cade's eyes was so profound it felt like a physical wound. Too late to stop the execution order. He found out who she truly was only after she and your father had been captured, in her final moments. She used the last of her alpha power to perform a great act of magic. She sealed something away, something vital. And now, I believe that whatever she sealed is the key to breaking this curse. As he spoke, a spasm of pain contorted his features. He braced himself against a stone bench, his breath hissing between his teeth. Instinct took over again. Brenna stepped closer, placing her hand on his back. This time, she focused, pushing the strange energy she felt inside her toward him. The blue-white light flamed, brighter this time, and Cade's ragged breathing evened out. The relief on his face was immediate and profound. They were standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "You are the only miracle in this hell," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The connection between them was terrifying, intoxicating. She pulled her hand away, taking a step back. "I'm not a miracle," she said, her voice unsteady. "I'm just caught." When she returned to her room, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and a strange, fluttering warmth. She found a piece of parchment on her pillow. It was not the castle's stationery. The note was written in a hurried, slanted script. "He's lying to you. Your mother didn't seal something she was murdered for refusing to give it up. Trust no one. You're next, a friend." Brenna's blood ran cold. Her gaze flew to the window. For a split second, she thought she saw a dark shape moving across the snow-covered rooftops, a shadow that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Her hand went to the small, sharp knife she always kept hidden in her boot. She was in a castle of secrets, and she was beginning to suspect that everyone, including the Broken King, was hiding the most dangerous ones. The next morning, Brenna was brought before the Royal Council. She was introduced not as a savior or a descendant of a lost pack, but as a special consultant, a vague title that did little to quell the suspicious stares from the lords and ladies arrayed around the great stone table. The tension in the room was a physical force. She could feel the fear, the ambition, the shifting loyalties as clearly as if they were spoken aloud. Cade sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of regal indifference, but Brenna could feel the effort it took him to maintain it. Damien Blackwood was the first to speak, his voice dripping with condescending skepticism. "I fail to see why we are placing our trust in the daughter of a known traitor." Cade's voice was arctic. "You place your trust in her because I do. That is all you need to know." "Your trust won't save this kingdom when the curse claims you." "Cousin," Damien countered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It was then that Brenna decided to stop being a passive observer. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting go of the world she could see and tuning in to the one she could hear, the echoes. They flooded her mind, a chaotic chorus of secret thoughts. From Lady Thea Silverwood, the sharp-eyed alpha of the Eastern Territories. "He looks weaker than yesterday. Gods, how long can we hide this from the other packs?" From Lord Marcus Ironhide, the grizzled, powerful alpha of the West. "If Damien takes the throne, my family is ruined. He'll undo every treaty I've forged." From Damien himself, a smug, predatory thought, sharp as a knife's edge. "Just a few more weeks, just a little longer, and everything he has will be mine." And then, a thought from Victoria Cross, so cold and clear it sent a shiver down Brenna's spine. "The girl is stronger than I anticipated. Her connection to him is already forming. I must accelerate the plan." The meeting ended in a stalemate of veiled threats and political posturing as soon as it was over. Brenna pulled Cade and Rowan into a private antechamber. "There's a traitor on your council," she said, her voice urgent. "Maybe more than one." Cade's brow furrowed. "Are you certain?" "I heard them," she explained, the words tumbling out. "I can hear their thoughts. Damien is just waiting for you to die, and Victoria, she called me the girl. She said she needs to accelerate the plan. She's using me for something." Cade and Rowan exchanged a dark, worried glance. "Victoria was the one who told us to find you," Rowan said grimly. "If she has her own agenda—" "We need proof before we can move against a high priestess," Cade decided, his jaw tight. "Brenna, can you keep listening? Find out what her plan is." He looked at her, his amber eyes filled with a new level of desperation. "I am placing my life and my kingdom in your hands." He then made a proclamation a royal hunt would be held in 3 days, a tradition, he called it, to bolster morale. In reality, it was a trap, a chance to observe everyone away from the suffocating politics of the castle. That night, Cade led her not to the training grounds or the war room, but to a place she never expected, a small, hidden library, tucked away behind a tapestry in his private quarters. "This was your father's workspace," Cade said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "When he stayed at the castle, I kept it exactly as he left it." Brenna's breath hitched. It was like stepping into a photograph of the past. Marcus Thorne's desk was still there, a stack of books on the corner, a half-empty inkwell. Maps of ancient territories were pinned to the walls. She ran her fingers over the spine of a book, a sudden, overwhelming wave of grief washing over her. On the desk lay a small, leather-bound journal. Her father's handwriting, familiar and beloved, filled the pages. Her hands shook as she opened it. October 15th, Isabel grows more anxious by the day. She speaks of whispers in the shadows, of a darkness that is hunting the last remnants of the first pack. She fears that if they are found, our little Brenna will be... The rest of the page had been torn out. A tear escaped her eye and splashed onto the brittle paper. She had not cried for her parents in years, had not allowed herself the weakness. But here, surrounded by the last remnants of her father's life, the dam of her control finally broke. Sobs racked her body, raw and painful. Cade didn't speak. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply moved to stand beside her, his presence a silent, solid anchor in her storm of grief. "Why?" she finally whispered, looking up at him through her tears. "Why did you keep all this for me?" His expression was filled with a profound, aching sorrow. "Because I knew I could never give them back to you," he said, his voice rough. "But I could give you a piece of them, a piece of the life you were meant to have." For the first time, she saw past the king, past the curse, and saw the man, a man burdened by a legacy he never asked for, haunted by a crime he did not commit, impulsively. She reached out and placed her hand on his. It wasn't to heal him, not this time. It was a simple, human gesture of comfort, a silent acknowledgement of their shared pain. He turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with hers. The touch was electric, a current of warmth that chased away some of the cold that had lived in her heart for so long. When she returned to her chambers later, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever before, she knew immediately that something was wrong. The air was different. The objects on her desk were shifted by a fraction of an inch. Someone had been in her room. The journal. She had brought it back with her. Frantically, she searched her bag, the drawers, under the bed. It was gone. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the large, silvered mirror above the fireplace. A message was written in the condensation from her own breath, as if someone had just spoken the words onto the glass. "Stop digging or you'll bury yourself." The words faded even as she read them, vanishing into the cool night air. There was no doubt now. The threat was not just outside the castle walls. It was inside, walking the same halls, breathing the same air, and it was watching her every move. The 2 days leading up to the royal hunt were a blur of tension and preparation. Rowan insisted on training her, taking her to the castle's armory. "If something happens out there," he said, handing her a dagger with a blade of pure, gleaming silver, "you need to be able to defend yourself. Not every wolf in this castle wears the king's colors." They sparred in the gray light of the courtyard, the ring of steel on steel echoing off the stone walls. Rowan was fast, but Brenna was faster, her movements honed by years of solitary hunting. During a break, as they caught their breath, she saw the worry etched on his face. "He wasn't always like this," Rowan said, nodding toward the king's balcony. "Cade. Before his father died, before he learned the full truth of Aldrich's reign, he used to smile." "What happened?" Brenna asked, her curiosity overriding her caution. Rowan hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He found his father's private journals. He learned things, horrible things, including what really happened the night your parents were executed. He met her gaze, his own full of sorrow. They weren't killed quickly. Aldrich tortured them for 3 days. He wanted the location of whatever it was Isabel had sealed away. When they refused to speak, he had them burned alive in front of the entire court. Brenna felt the blood drain from her face. She felt sick. Was Cade there?" Rowan nodded grimly. "He was 12 years old. Aldrich forced him to watch. He called it a lesson in absolute power. That was the day the light went out in Cade's eyes, the day he swore he would never become his father." Later that afternoon, Victoria Cross found her. "Your power is a wild river, my dear," the priestess said, her voice like honeyed silk. "Allow me to help you build a dam." She led Brenna to her meditation chamber, a circular room filled with softly glowing crystals. "Your gift is more than just hearing thoughts in the present," Victoria explained. "With focus, you can access memories, even memories the host has long forgotten." She brought in one of the royal hounds, a large, gentle beast, under Victoria's guidance. Brenna placed her hand on the dog's head and concentrated. At first, there was nothing but a jumble of scents and simple canine thoughts. Then, an image sharpened in her mind, a sun-drenched field, the feeling of chasing a ball as a puppy, pure, uncomplicated joy. As Brenna was lost in the memory, she didn't see Victoria deftly pluck a single strand of her long, dark hair. The priestess murmured a spell too quiet for Brenna to hear, and the strand of hair glowed with a faint, crimson light before turning to dust in her palm. When Brenna opened her eyes, she felt drained, a profound exhaustion settling deep in her bones. "I'm so tired." Victoria smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression. "That is to be expected, my dear. Power always demands a price." That night, the exhaustion pulled Brenna into a nightmare. She was standing in a circle of fire, and her mother, Isabel, was there. Her mother's image was translucent, ethereal, her voice an urgent, fading whisper. "Brenna, do not trust her. Victoria doesn't want to help you. She wants your blood for the..." The voice dissolved into static and fire. Brenna woke with a scream caught in her throat, her body drenched in cold sweat. The door to her room burst open, and Cade was there, sword in hand, his eyes wild with alarm. "Brenna, are you hurt?" Seeing it was only a nightmare, the tension drained from his shoulders, but he didn't leave. He saw her trembling, the terror still clinging to her. He walked to her bed and sat on the edge, his movements hesitant. Then, with a protective instinct that seemed to override his royal decorum, he pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. She buried her face in his shoulder, shaking. "I saw my mother," she whispered against his tunic. "She was warning me about Victoria." He held her tighter. "I will not let anyone harm you," he vowed. his voice a low, fierce rumble in his chest. "I swear it." She looked up at him then, their faces inches apart in the moonlight. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why do you care so much what happens to me?" His amber eyes were dark, intense. "Because the moment I saw you," he confessed, his voice raw with a truth he seemed to be admitting for the first time. "The moment my wolf scented you, it was like a piece of my fractured soul had finally come home. For the first time in years, I felt whole." She felt it too, this undeniable, terrifying pull, this sense of rightness when he was near. Is this connection just part of the curse?" she whispered, afraid of the answer. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but what I feel for you, that is real." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers, tentative at first, then with a deep, searching intensity that stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of desperation and discovery, a silent question and its resounding answer. The next morning, the fragile piece of that moment was shattered. Mira, the young servant who had spoken to Brenna about her mother's room, was found dead at the edge of the woods. Her throat had been torn out. Rowan examined the body, his face grim. "The bite marks are from a wolf," he said, "but not one of ours. This is the work of a wild wolf." He looked at Cade, then his gaze shifted uncomfortably to Brenna. "They never attack people on castle grounds. Never. Unless someone commanded them to," Cade finished, his voice dangerously low. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. Brenna was the only one there who could communicate with the wild wolves, the only one who could have given such an order. "You think I did this?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and fury. "I didn't even know I could command them." But the seed of doubt had been planted in the court of wolves. Trust was a currency more valuable and more volatile than gold, and hers had just plummeted. Despite Mira's death, or perhaps because of it, the royal hunt proceeded as planned. To cancel it would be to admit fear, to show weakness. The courtyard was a chaotic scene of armored warriors, stamping horses, and the low, excited growls of the hunting hounds. Damien approached Cade and Brenna, his eyes glittering with malice. "Perhaps our special consultant should remain within the castle walls," he suggested with a sneer. "For her own safety, of course." "Brenna rides with me," Cade said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He helped her onto her horse, his hand lingering for a moment on hers, a silent promise of protection. They rode into the vast, ancient thornwood, dividing into 4 hunting parties. Cade, Brenna, and Rowan formed the core of one group as they moved deeper into the forest, beneath a canopy of skeletal winter branches. Brenna felt it. Eyes, dozens of them. The wild wolves were shadowing them, their echoes a low, curious thrum in her mind. One thought, from a dominant mind, rose above the others. The last daughter walks among us. We must test her. They were being herded. Brenna realized it a moment before it happened. The path subtly narrowed. The woods grew thicker until they found themselves in a small, dense clearing. And then the wolves emerged from the trees. They flowed from the shadows like smoke, a silent, menacing ring of gray and black fur. They didn't growl or snarl. They simply watched Brenna. Cade moved his horse to shield her. "Stay behind me." But Brenna shook her head. "No," she said, a strange certainty settling over her. "They don't want to fight you. They want to talk to me." She dismounted, her heart pounding, and took a step toward them. The circle of wolves parted, and a magnificent alpha stepped forward. Her fur was the color of burning embers, her eyes a startling, intelligent green. The voice that filled Brenna's head was female, powerful, and laced with ancient authority. "You carry Isabel's scent, her blood, but do you carry her courage?" Brenna met the alpha's gaze, her own resolve hardening, using the strange, silent language of the echoes. She sent back a single thought. If this is a test, I am ready. The wolf, whose name she now knew was Ember, seemed to approve. Then follow me, alone. Absolutely not, Cade growled, dismounting as well. I am not letting you go with them alone. Brenna turned to him, her eyes pleading. Cade, this is the only way. They know something about my mother. I can feel it. Please, trust me. He looked from her desperate face to the calmly waiting alpha wolf. The war within him was visible on his face. The king, the man, the protector. Finally, with a grim nod, he relented. 1 hour, he said, his voice a low threat directed at Ember. If she is not back in 1 hour, I will burn this entire forest to the ground. Ember led Brenna deep into the woods, to a hidden cave behind a curtain of frozen vines. Inside, a subterranean pool glowed with a soft, ethereal light, illuminating ancient paintings on the cave walls, depictions of great wolves and celestial events. Then, the impossible happened. The wolf shimmered, its form twisting and reshaping until a human woman stood in its place. She was tall and strong, with wild, flame-red hair and the same intelligent green eyes. It has been a long time since I've had reason to wear this skin, she said, her voice raspy. I am Ember. I was your mother's beta, her right hand. I was the last person to speak with her before Aldrich's men took her. Brenna's knees felt weak. What did she say? She entrusted me with a secret, Ember said, her expression solemn. A truth she died to protect. The truth of your blood. Ember took a deep breath. You are not just Isabel's daughter, child. You are the product of an ancient rite, the blood binding. Your mother knew of the prophecy of the soul fracture. She knew that one day. The Ashford line would be cursed and would need the power of the first pack to survive. So she bound her bloodline to theirs. She performed the rite with the Alpha King before Aldrich, your grandfather. Thaddeus Ashford. Brenna stared, her mind refusing to process the words. You're saying Marcus Thorne wasn't my biological father? Marcus was the father who raised you, who loved you with his whole heart. Ember corrected gently. But the blood that flows in your veins is a union of the first pack and the royal crown. It is why you feel Cade's pain so keenly. You share an ancestral bloodline. It is why only you can heal him, because you are the bridge between his two worlds. Ember's face grew graver still, but there is more. When your mother sealed your power, she didn't just lock away your wolf. She hid a piece of her own soul essence within your heart. It is the source of your powerful echoes. But the ritual to cure the king, it requires a sacrifice to unlock that power and save Cade. The fragment of Isabel's soul within you will be consumed. You will lose the last piece of your mother forever. The choice was devastating. Save the man she was beginning to feel an impossible connection with, or hold on to the last remnant of the mother she barely remembered. I need to think. Time is a luxury you do not have, Ember warned. Others are hunting you. They know what you are. As if summoned by her words, chaos erupted. When Brenna returned to the clearing, they were ambushed. Figures in black masks and armor dropped from the trees, moving with the preternatural speed of wolves. Take the Thorn girl alive, one of them shouted. Kill the rest. Cade shifted, his great gray wolf roaring to life. But the curse made him slower, his movements labored. Brenna saw one of the attackers slash him across the flank with a silver blade. He roared in pain, stumbling. Seeing him hurt, something inside Brenna snapped, a primal. Protective fury erupted from the core of her being. She screamed, not a sound of fear, but of pure power, a shockwave of brilliant. Silver energy burst from her, slamming into the attackers and sending them flying back into the trees. The clearing fell silent. Everyone, Rowan, Cade. The remaining attackers stared at her. She looked down at her hands. They were glowing with a soft, silvery light. Cade, staggering back into his human form, looked at her with awe and shock. That was the power of the first pack, he breathed. You've awakened it. The ambush left 2 of the masked attackers captured and Cade with a deep, silver-laced wound that refused to heal. The curse fought against his regenerative abilities, leaving him weak and feverish. They made a rough camp, and Brenna knelt beside him. The silver light still hummed beneath her skin. Hesitantly, she placed her hands over his wound. She focused not on healing, but on the connection between them, pushing her newfound energy into him. As she did, a vision slammed into her mind. She saw through Cade's eyes. He was a small boy, huddled and crying in a dark chamber in the castle. From outside the room, she could hear the screams, her parents' screams. She felt the boy's helpless terror, his desperate prayers for his father to stop. She pulled her hands back with a gasp, tears streaming down her face. The vision faded, but the shared memory remained, a scar on her own soul. "What did you see?" Cade asked, his voice weak. "I saw you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "The night they died. You were there. You were crying." A look of profound, ancient pain crossed his face. "I begged him to stop," he confessed, the words torn from him. "He called me weak. He said a king can have no regrets." He looked at her, his amber eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I have never regretted anything more." In that moment, she understood. He wasn't just the son of her parents' killer. He was his father's first victim. Back at the castle, the captured assassins were interrogated. Under the threat of Damien's cold fury, he had surprisingly insisted on participating. One of them broke. "We were hired by the Silver Circle," the man gasped. Rowan, reporting to Cade and Brenna later, was grim. He said it wasn't the whole council, just one member. They wanted your blood, Brenna, for a ritual. Brenna's mind raced back to her nightmare, her mother's warning. "Victoria," she breathed. "She was helping us find Brenna." Cade protested, though the conviction in his voice was wavering. "No," Brenna said, the terrible truth falling into place. "She wasn't helping you find me. She was helping herself find me. She brought me here so she could get to me." They needed proof. Direct confrontation without it would be suicide. "Let me do it," Brenna said, her voice steely. "Let me get close to her. I can enter her mind. I can see the truth." "It's too dangerous," Cade argued. "If she detects you..." "You have 45 days until the eclipse, Cade," she countered softly. "We are out of choices." The plan was simple and terrifying. They would host a small feast that evening, a celebration for a successful hunt. Under the cover of the festivities, Brenna would approach Victoria, feigning a need for more guidance. Once the priestess's guard was down, Brenna would strike. At the feast, the air was thick with paranoia. Damien pulled Brenna aside, his expression surprisingly serious. "I know you don't trust me," he said, "but I don't want to see my cousin die. My father told me stories. Isabel Thorne wasn't just hunted for her bloodline. She was trying to stop an ancient curse from being awakened, the very same curse that now afflicts Cade. Aldrich didn't create it. He just foolishly unleashed it when he killed her." Later, Lady Thea cornered her by the hearth. "Be careful of Victoria," the Alpha whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Years ago, my younger sister showed a gift for scrying. Victoria took her under her wing to help her control it. 3 months later, my sister died in her sleep. No one ever knew why." Steeling her nerves, Brenna approached the High Priestess. "I felt the power again," she said, letting a tremor of fear enter her voice. "But I can't control it. I'm scared. Can you help me?" Victoria's silver eyes gleamed. "Of course, my dear. Come to my chambers after the feast." In the tower, Victoria handed Brenna a cup of herbal tea. "Drink this. It will calm your spirit and open your mind." Brenna raised the cup to her lips, but as Victoria turned to light some candles, she let the dark liquid dribble down her sleeve onto the stone floor. When the priestess's back was turned, Brenna closed her eyes and pushed with all her might, sending her consciousness like an arrow into Victoria's mind. The visions that hit her were a maelstrom of ambition and darkness. Victoria, centuries younger, kneeling before a dark, blood-stained altar, a formless voice whispers, "To gain the power of the first pack and achieve immortality, you must sacrifice the last daughter on the night of the blood eclipse." Victoria, whispering in King Aldrich's ear, planting the seeds of paranoia. "The thorns are a threat. Your Majesty, they seek to usurp you." Victoria, watching the execution from her tower, a triumphant smile on her face. The truth was a physical blow. Victoria had orchestrated everything: the death of her parents, the unleashing of the curse on Cade. It was all a centuries-long plan to bring Brenna, the key to her immortality, to this very castle. Suddenly, the mental landscape shattered. Brenna was thrown back into her own body with a violent jolt. Victoria stood before her, her silver eyes now glowing a terrifying, malevolent red. "You foolish little girl," Victoria hissed, her voice no longer silken but sharp as shattered glass. "Did you really think you could pry into my mind and go undetected?" The door to the chamber was sealed shut with a wave of Victoria's hand. "I had intended to wait until the eclipse, but it seems we must accelerate the schedule." She began to chant, and Brenna felt a paralyzing force creep up her limbs, just as Victoria raised her hands to strike. The chamber door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges. Cade stood there, his wolf raging just beneath his skin. Rowan at his side. They had been waiting outside, a desperate contingency plan. A battle of raw power versus dark magic erupted in the small room. Victoria hurled bolts of black energy, and Cade met them with the ferocious strength of his alpha bloodline, though each effort clearly cost him. "You think you can save him?" Victoria shrieked, her voice crazed. "The curse is in your blood. Ashford passed down from king to king. My spell merely activated it. The only way to break it is to sacrifice the last daughter, and I will be the one to do it." She gathered her power for a final, killing blow aimed at Brenna. But in that moment of extreme peril, the dam inside Brenna didn't just crack, it shattered. A wave of pure, untamed silver light erupted from her, a supernova of raw power. It ripped through Victoria's shields, shattered her spells, and slammed her against the far wall, where she collapsed, unconscious. Brenna stood in the center of the room, her hair floating around her as if she were underwater, her eyes glowing with a brilliant silver light. Cade stared at her, breathing heavily, a mixture of awe and terror on his face. "Brenna!" The aftermath was swift. Victoria was imprisoned, but even chained in the dungeons, she laughed. "It's too late. The eclipse is coming. The daughter must still choose." In an emergency council meeting, Cade made his stance clear. "If it comes down to my life or Brenna's, I choose hers. I will not allow her to be sacrificed." "You don't get to make that choice for me," Brenna retorted later, confronting him in his chambers. The energy of the fight still coursed between them, raw and electric. "And I don't get to let you die for me," he roared back, his control snapping. "I watched your parents burn. Brenna, I cannot watch their daughter die for my sake." "And I can't watch you die," she cried, tears of frustration and fear blurring her vision. "I won't lose you." He strode across the room, his anger melting away, replaced by a desperate intensity. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "When did this happen?" he whispered, searching her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted breathlessly. "Maybe the moment you knelt for me, maybe when you showed me my father's journal, or maybe it was the first time I looked in your eyes and saw myself." "I love you, Brenna Thorne," he said, the words a raw, undeniable truth. "From the moment I first scented you, my wolf knew. You are mine, and I am yours." He crushed his lips to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of found hope, of two broken souls crashing together. It was a promise, a prayer, and a lament all at once. They were interrupted by a knock. It was Rowan. "I found this in Victoria's chambers," he said, holding up an ancient, rolled-up map. "It leads to a place called the Morning Vale. It's where the moonveil flower is said to grow." As they looked at the map, a figure appeared in the open balcony doorway. It was Ember, now in her human form. "I know this place," the wild alpha said, "but it is guarded by the Shadow Pack. They are feral, territorial spirits, and they let no one pass." She paused, her green eyes grave. "Unless the challenger can defeat their alpha in single combat, and their alpha has never known defeat." Brenna looked at Cade, whose face was pale but resolute. "Then I will be the first," she said. "No," Cade countered immediately. "I will." "You're still weak from the curse," she argued. "Right now, I'm stronger." "Or," Rowan interjected, looking between the two stubborn alphas, "you could go together." Cade and Brenna looked at each other. A silent agreement passed between them. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. They spent 3 days preparing for the journey. To Brenna's surprise, Damien volunteered to train her personally. "If you intend to fight the Shadow Alpha," he said, his tone devoid of its usual mockery, "you need to learn to think like one." He taught her brutal, efficient, and dishonorable tactics, how to use an opponent's weight against them, where to strike for maximum pain, how to end a fight quickly. Cade watched from a distance, his jaw tight with disapproval, but he didn't intervene. He knew she needed this. The night before they left, Cade found her on the balcony overlooking the silent, snow-covered kingdom. He pressed something cold and metallic into her hand. It was a silver chain, and on it hung a pendant carved into the shape of a crescent moon. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "She told me it would protect whoever wears it." "Cade, I can't—" "Please," he interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Wear it, and come back to me." He drew her into his arms, and they stood there for a long time, holding each other against the coming dark. It was a night of soft whispers and desperate touches, a stolen moment of peace before the storm. Their party was small and efficient: Cade, Brenna, Rowan, a reluctant but resolute Damien, Ember to guide them, and 5 of the castle's most elite warriors. They rode out at dawn, a small, grim procession heading toward the darkest corner of the kingdom. The Morning Vale lived up to its name. The moment they crossed its borders, the world changed. The trees were black, twisted things, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a permanently overcast sky. A thick, unnatural mist clung to the ground, muffling all sound and making the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. "This land is saturated with death," Ember said, her voice a low whisper. "Thousands died here in the old wars. Their spirits never left." Brenna could feel them, whispers at the edge of her hearing, not echoes of the living, but faint, sorrowful voices of the dead. One voice sounded achingly familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby, her mother's. "Turn back, my daughter. This path leads to sacrifice." A shiver traced its way down her spine. Cade must have sensed her fear, because he reached over and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I'm here," he murmured. They made camp the first night in a small, defensible clearing. Cade and Brenna took the second watch. They sat by the low fire, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. "If we succeed," Cade said, looking into the flames, "after the curse is broken, will you stay?" Brenna turned to look at him, at his strong profile illuminated by the firelight. "Do you want me to stay?" "I want you by my side," he said, turning to face her, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Not as a consultant or an ally, not because of a prophecy, because I cannot imagine a future without you in it." "As what?" she whispered. His expression was utterly serious. "As my queen, my mate, if you'll have me." Before she could answer, the world exploded into silent, swift violence. Shapes darker than the surrounding night shot out of the mist. They were wolves, but they moved with an eerie, ghost-like silence. "Shadow Pack," Ember yelled, shifting into her massive wolf form. "They've found us!" The battle was a chaotic whirl of black fur and flashing steel. The shadow wolves were impossibly fast, unnaturally strong. One of their warriors went down, his scream cut short. Another cried out in pain. Cade shifted, his powerful form moving to defend them, but Brenna could see the curse slowing him, the pain hampering his every move. Then, the Alpha appeared. It was a colossal beast, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its fur the color of pure void, its eyes burning like two red coals. A voice, ancient and filled with cold rage, echoed in all their minds. "You trespass on sacred ground. The penalty is death." Brenna stepped forward, her body trembling but her resolve firm. "I challenge you," she projected, her own voice ringing with a newfound authority. "For the rite of passage, if I win, you let us pass. If I lose, my life is yours." The great wolf turned its burning gaze on her, a low, rumbling thought, like the shifting of tectonic plates, filled her head. "Bold, for one who has not yet embraced her own nature, but foolish, I accept." The rules were set. The fight would take place at dawn, wolf form against wolf form. A cold dread washed over Cade. He shifted back to his human form, his eyes wide with panic. "Brenna, you can't. Your wolf, it's still sealed." Ember looked at Brenna, her green eyes piercing. "Not entirely. The seal was fractured when your power erupted at the castle, but to complete the shift, to truly become the wolf, you must face the deepest fear you have." Brenna looked from Cade's terrified face to the impassive stare of the shadow Alpha. She had spent her entire life as half of a whole, a wolf trapped in human skin. Tomorrow, she would either become who she was meant to be, or she would die trying. That night, under Ember's solemn guidance, Brenna prepared for the impossible. "The shift is not about breaking bones, it is about breaking boundaries," Ember explained as they sat by the fire, "away from the others. Your entire life. You have been taught to fear the beast within. Tonight, you must not just accept it, you must become it. I'm afraid," Brenna confessed, her voice small. "What if I lose myself in it? What if it takes over?" "You will not lose yourself," Ember assured her. "You will find yourself." Cade joined them later, his face etched with worry. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "The first time I shifted, I was 13, he said softly. "I thought the wolf would consume me, but it didn't. For the first time in my life, I felt complete, like two halves of a single soul finally united." "And now?" she asked, looking at him, at the faint tremor in his hands that betrayed his constant pain. "Now that your wolf is being torn away." "Now," he said, his voice rough, "I feel like I'm dying, but when I'm with you, I feel alive again." Ember began the ritual, using a mixture of ash and a drop of Brenna's own blood. She painted ancient, spiraling symbols onto Brenna's arms and forehead. "These are the sigils of the first pack," she murmured. They will help you connect to the strength of your ancestors. As the last symbol was completed, a strange heat began to build deep inside Brenna. At midnight, beneath the cold, white eye of the moon, she began. She closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the caged animal. She found it, snarling and afraid, and tried to coax it out. Nothing happened. She pushed harder, focusing all her will. A searing pain shot through her, as if her muscles were tearing themselves apart. "Stop, Brenna!" Cade cried out, seeing her face contort in agony. "You're hurting yourself." "No, I have to do this," she gasped. In the vortex of pain, visions assailed her. She was 5 again, watching her mother being dragged away into the smoke. She was 10. Sage sadly telling her, "Don't try anymore, child, it's too dangerous." She was 15, watching the wild wolves run through the forest, a desperate, hollow ache of longing in her chest. Then, a new voice, clear and strong, cut through the memories, her mother's. "You are afraid of your power, because you think it will destroy you. But power doesn't destroy. Brenna, fear does." Something inside her broke, the fear, the resistance. She stopped fighting the pain, stopped trying to control the beast. She surrendered to it. She opened the cage. This time, the transformation was real. It was an agony beyond imagining, a symphony of snapping bones and stretching sinew. But through the pain, there was also a wild, exhilarating sense of release. She didn't scream. She roared. When it was over, she stood on 4 paws, her new senses overwhelming her. The world was a tapestry of scent and sound she had never known. She was larger than a normal wolf, her fur a brilliant, shining silver, her eyes the same startling blue, but now burning with an inner light. Cade shifted, his own great gray form appearing beside her, looking weary but whole. They looked at each other, and for the first time, their minds truly connected, a seamless flow of thought and emotion. "You are magnificent," Cade sent, his thought a mixture of awe and relief. "I feel free," she returned, the feeling so powerful it was almost overwhelming. They ran together through the moonlit forest, a dance of silver and gray, 2 souls finally speaking the same language. At dawn, the Shadow Alpha was waiting. The fight was brutal and swift. The Shadow Alpha was a whirlwind of black fury, all muscle and experience. He was stronger, faster. He raked his claws across her flank, and the pain was a shock of fire. But Brenna was smarter. She had spent a lifetime as a hunter, observing, waiting for the perfect moment. She feigned a lunge to the left, and as the great wolf moved to counter, she twisted and sank her teeth into his back leg. He roared in fury, throwing her off and charging for the final blow. Cade tensed, ready to leap in, but Rowan held him back in his human form. "This is her fight. You interfere. We all die." As the black wolf descended upon her, Brenna heard her mother's voice once more, not a memory, but a living presence in her soul. "You are not just my daughter. You are the last daughter of the first pack. You carry the strength of 1,000 ancestors. Rise." Power surged through her. Her silver fur began to glow with an ethereal light. She didn't dodge the Alpha's attack. She met it head-on, using his own momentum to throw him off balance. In a flash of silver, she was on top of him, her teeth at his throat. She didn't bite down to kill. She held him, a clear message of dominance. For a long moment, the great beast struggled, then went still. He had surrendered. The Shadow Pack let out a collective howl, not of anger, but of respect. Their Alpha shifted back into a towering, scarred man. "You fight with the heart of your mother, last daughter," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The way is open to you." Brenna shifted back, exhausted but victorious, collapsing into Cade's waiting arms. "You did it," he whispered, holding her tight. The Moonveil flower you seek lies in a cave, a 3-hour journey from here, the Shadow Alpha informed them. But I must give you a warning. The flower demands a price for its power. It requires a sacrifice of blood. Not just any blood, the blood of the one who loves most deeply. Brenna and Cade looked at each other, the joyous victory instantly turning to ice in their veins. The price of his life had just become terrifyingly clear. The journey to the Moonveil cave was suffocatingly silent. The Shadow Alpha's words echoed in the air between them, a death sentence for one of them. "It will be my blood," Cade stated, his voice flat and absolute. "There will be no discussion." "No," Brenna argued, her horse trotting to keep pace with his. "You are the king. Your people need you to live." "My people can find another king," he retorted, his voice raw. "My heart cannot find another you." He turned to her, his amber eyes full of a desperate, pleading love. "I will not let you die for me, Brenna." "And I won't let you die for me," she cried, her own emotions fraying. "Don't you understand? Cade, if you die, a part of me dies with you. I can't live in a world you're not in." "You are both fools," Ember interjected, her voice cutting through their argument. "The flower does not demand death, it demands sacrifice. There is a difference." "What difference?" Brenna asked. "Death is an end," Ember explained. "Sacrifice is a choice to give up something precious for something you value even more. The flower requires an offering of blood, yes, but it is a symbol of the true sacrifice you are willing to make in your heart." The cave was a breathtaking sight. The walls were lined with glowing blue crystals, and in the very center, growing from a crack in the stone, was a single, perfect flower. Its petals were as white as moonlight, its stamen glowing with a soft, silver light. As they approached, a disembodied voice, ancient and powerful, filled the cave. "To claim the Moonveil is to offer your deepest sacrifice. What are you willing to lose for the one you love?" Brenna and Cade looked at each other and made a silent pact. They stepped into the ring of light around the flower together. The moment their fingers brushed against its petals, they were ripped from reality and plunged into separate visions. Brenna saw a future. Cade was alive, strong, the curse gone. He ruled over a peaceful, prosperous kingdom. He was smiling, but she wasn't there. She was alone, back in the mountains, watching him from afar. The magical bond between them had been severed. She would live, but she would never feel his love again. "You can save him," the voice whispered in her mind, "but you must give up his heart. Is this the sacrifice you choose?" At the same time, Cade saw Brenna. She was free, powerful, leading a new pack of wild wolves, her silver fur gleaming in the sun. She was happy, but he was not there. He had let the curse consume him, his face just a fading memory. "She can live free," the voice told him, "but you must surrender your life, never to hold her again. Is this the sacrifice you choose?" Without hesitation, their voices rang out in their separate visions, a single, unified answer. "I choose to sacrifice myself." They were both willing to give up everything for the other to live. The flower pulsed with an explosive white light. "Two hearts, one choice," the ancient voice boomed, full of approval. "Love without condition, sacrifice without hesitation. This is the truth the Moonveil seeks." When the light faded, Cade and Brenna were still standing, unharmed, but on each of their wrists, a new scar had appeared, a shimmering silver crescent moon, and the flower in Brenna's hand had changed. It now had 2 petals, one moonbeam white, the other shadow black. "This has never happened before," Ember breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "The flower accepted both your sacrifices. It has been transformed." "What does that mean?" Cade asked. "It means this flower will no longer just break the curse," Ember explained. a note of awe in her voice. "It will perform the soul bind. It will not just save you. Cade, it will permanently fuse your souls. From this moment on, your strengths will be shared. Your lives will be linked. If one of you dies, the other will follow." Cade turned to Brenna, his expression impossibly tender. "Knowing the risk, do you still choose this?" Brenna looked into his eyes, her heart swelling with a love so powerful it hurt. "I was already willing to die for you. Cade, living for you isn't a choice, it's a necessity." "Then we do this," he said, his voice firm. "Together." Their moment was shattered by Rowan, who came sprinting into the cave, his face pale with alarm. "We have a problem. A messenger just arrived from the castle." He took a ragged breath. "Victoria has escaped, and she's taken Sage." Brenna's blood ran cold. "No." "She left a message." Rowan continued grimly. "It said, if you want the old witch to live, the last daughter must come to the altar of first blood before the eclipse, alone." "It's a trap," Cade growled. "I know," Brenna said, her voice shaking but resolute. "But it's one I have to walk into. I will not let Sage die for me." The news threw their plans into chaos. They had 7 days until the blood eclipse. Iron Peak Castle and the healers were 4 days in one direction. The altar of first blood was 4 days in the opposite. They couldn't do both. "We go back to the castle first," Cade commanded, his alpha authority ringing in his voice. "Once I am healed, I will be at full strength. We can face Victoria together. Walking into her trap while I am still weakened is suicide." "We don't have time," Brenna argued, her panic rising. "Victoria will kill Sage. She is using her as bait to get to me." The tension between them was a taut wire, vibrating with fear and love. "If you die, I die," Cade reminded her, his voice rough with pain. "Did you forget the vow we just made? And if I let Sage die to save myself, I won't be able to live with the person I become," she shot back, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't ask me to do that. Cade, don't." It was Damien who broke the stalemate. "We divide," he said, his voice surprisingly calm and logical. "Cade, you take Rowan, the flower, and half the warriors. Ride for Iron Peak like the hells are chasing you. Get the ritual done. I will go with Brenna and Ember to the altar. We will not engage. We will scout, delay, and do whatever we can to keep Sage alive until you get there." Cade stared at his cousin, suspicion warring with desperation in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Damien met his gaze without flinching. "Because if Brenna dies, you die, and if you die, the kingdom I inherit will be torn apart by civil war. I am many things, cousin, but I am not stupid. You are the better king." It was the only way. Cade and Brenna had one last night together, a night of whispered promises and clinging embraces under a sky of cold, distant stars. "When this is over," Cade murmured, his lips against her hair, "we will have a proper wedding, in the great hall, before all the packs." Brenna laughed through her tears. "Are you proposing to me, Your Majesty?" "I think I've been proposing to you since the moment we met," he admitted. "I'm just making sure you heard me." "I accept," she whispered. "Now come back to me alive so I can hold you to it." The morning departure was agony. Cade and Brenna held each other in a final, desperate kiss, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Rowan finally had to pull Cade away. "The faster we leave, my king, the faster you return to her." Brenna watched him ride away until he was just a speck in the distance, a part of her soul tearing away to go with him. The journey with Damien was tense. On the 3rd night, she finally asked him the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you really come with me?" Damien stared into the fire, his handsome face unusually somber. "Years ago, my father tried to have Cade assassinated so that I could inherit the throne sooner. Cade found out. He had every right to execute me as a conspirator, but he didn't. He banished my father and gave me a second chance." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "I owe him a life. I am here to repay that debt." On the night before the eclipse, Ember returned from a scouting mission, her face grim. "Victoria has a magical barrier around the altar. There are at least 20 loyalists inside. Sage is alive, but she is weak. She's chained to the central stone." The trap was set. "I go in alone, as she demanded," Brenna said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "You all wait for Cade. As soon as he arrives, you attack with everything you have." At dawn, as a blood-red sliver of moon began to appear in the sky, Brenna walked toward the altar. The magical barrier shimmered and opened for her, then closed behind her, sealing her in. Victoria stood on the dais, a triumphant, cruel smile on her face. Sage was chained at her feet, pale and barely conscious. "Welcome, last daughter," Victoria purred. "I've been waiting for you." Brenna's eyes were fixed on Sage. "Let her go." "Oh, I will," Victoria said with a chilling laugh. "All in good time. First, we have a ritual to complete, and you, my dear, are the main event." The altar of first blood was a place of profound wrongness. The trees around it were petrified and black, the ground barren. The altar itself was a massive slab of obsidian, carved with twisting, arcane symbols that seemed to drink the very light from the air. The eclipse was beginning, casting a sickly, crimson glow over everything. "You think this is merely about power?" Victoria mocked, seeing the defiance in Brenna's eyes. How charmingly naive. "This is about immortality. The prophecy is a lie I twisted to my own purpose. When the eclipse is at its peak, I will pierce your heart with this." She held up a wicked-looking dagger of volcanic glass. "Your soul will be untethered from your body, and I will absorb its essence. Binding your first-pack life force to my own, I will live forever." Brenna tried to stall, to buy time. "My parents, what did they have to do with this?" "Your mother knew my plan," Victoria snarled. "She intended to hide you forever. She even sacrificed herself and her foolish husband to protect your secret. Her only mistake was hiding a piece of her own soul inside you to protect you. Now, I shall claim you both." "Brenna," Sage's voice was weak, but it cut through the air. "Don't listen, your mother. She left you a key, inside your heart, to destroy the ritual." Victoria viciously kicked Sage, silencing her. "Enough out of you, old woman." Her masked warriors seized Brenna, dragging her onto the cold stone altar and binding her wrists and ankles with chains of dark magic. The obsidian was like ice against her skin. From the trees, a battle cry erupted. Damien and the warriors charged the barrier, smashing against it with all their might. Ember's howl answered from the hills, and a tide of wild wolves surged forward, throwing themselves at Victoria's forces. But Victoria was prepared. With a laugh, she slammed her staff on the ground, and ghostly, tormented figures rose from the earth around the altar, the spirits of her previous victims, bound to her will. Panic seized Brenna. She was trapped. She closed her eyes, shutting out the chaos, and reached across the miles with the soul bond that connected her to Cade. "Cade," she screamed in her mind, a desperate, silent plea. "If you can hear me, I need you. Now." Miles away, Cade was riding like a man possessed. The ritual at the castle had been a success. The flower had not only healed the fracture, it had filled him with a power he had never known, a perfect union of his own strength and Brenna's. He felt her cry of terror as if it were his own, a visceral, agonizing rip in his soul. "She's in danger," he roared to Rowan. "We have to be faster." He pushed his horse to an impossible speed, his wolf lending him its inhuman stamina. Back at the altar, the eclipse was nearing totality. The world was bathed in blood-red light. Victoria raised the obsidian dagger high above Brenna's chest. "A new era begins," she shrieked. The dagger plunged downward. Brenna squeezed her eyes shut. A thunderous crack echoed through the clearing. A blur of gray and silver shot through the barrier as if it were smoke, slamming into Victoria and sending her flying. The dagger clattered harmlessly onto the stone. Cade was there. He shifted back to his human form, landing lightly between Victoria and the altar. He was no longer the fractured king. He radiated pure, untamed power, his amber eyes blazing with golden light. He was whole. "Touch her again," Cade growled, his voice a low, lethal promise, "and I will tear you apart, atom by atom." Victoria scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of fury. "You think being healed makes you a match for me? I am eternal." "You have never faced an alpha who is one half of a whole," Cade said. Rowan cut Brenna's bonds, and she scrambled off the altar to stand beside Cade. He took her hand, and as their skin touched, a visible aura of swirling silver and gold energy erupted around them. "This ends now," they said together, their voices a perfect, unified chord of power. The final battle began. Victoria threw everything she had at them, bolts of corrosive shadow, shrieking phantoms, spells that twisted the very ground beneath their feet, but Cade and Brenna moved as one. A seamless dance of instinct and power. Their soul bind allowed them to anticipate each other's every move, to think and act as a single being. When Cade lunged, Brenna was already moving to cover his flank. When she threw up a shield of silver light, he channeled his alpha strength through it, turning it into a battering ram. "You've completed the soul bind," Victoria shrieked, a note of true fear entering her voice for the first time. Realizing she couldn't win with brute force, she attacked their minds. "He doesn't love you." "Girl," she projected into Brenna's thoughts, "he is bound to you by magic, nothing more, a prisoner of prophecy." For a split second, Brenna faltered, the old insecurity rearing its head. Victoria seized the opening, launching a spear of black energy directly at her. Cade moved faster than thought, throwing himself in front of Brenna and taking the full force of the blast. He was thrown backward, skidding across the stone, but he rose to one knee, blood trickling from his lips. "She's wrong," he gasped, his eyes locking with Brenna's. "I love you. Not because of a prophecy, because you are Brenna." His words, so simple and true, shattered the last of her doubt. In that moment, she understood what Sage meant. The key her mother had left wasn't an object. It was a feeling. It was love. The pure, selfless love Isabel had sealed inside her heart to protect her. She placed a hand over her own heart, and a warm, brilliant light bloomed from her chest. The ghostly, translucent form of her mother, Isabel, appeared before her, smiling. "My daughter," Isabel's voice whispered, full of pride and love. "I cannot stay, but I can give you one last gift." She touched Brenna's forehead, a lifetime of knowledge, of power, of ancient first-pack magic flooded into Brenna. Her body transformed. She did not become a wolf, but something more. Her eyes glowed with pure silver light. Her arms became covered in shimmering, ethereal fur. She had taken on the legendary lunar form, the perfect balance between wolf and human. "It can't be," Damien whispered from the edge of the clearing, his eyes wide with disbelief. Victoria knew she was beaten. She turned to flee, but Brenna was there in a heartbeat, blocking her path. "You can't kill me," the priestess screamed. "I don't have to," Brenna replied, her voice an echo of her own and her mother's. She placed her hand on Victoria's chest. She didn't push or strike. She pulled. She pulled out the stolen souls, one by one, then by the dozens. The spirits Victoria had consumed were ripped from her, flying free into the night. With each soul that left, Victoria aged, her hair turned white, her skin wrinkled, her body withered. When the last soul was free, She crumbled into a pile of ancient dust, which the wind scattered into nothingness. The eclipse ended. The normal. Silver moonlight returned, bathing the clearing in a gentle glow. The battle was over. Brenna rushed to Sage, who was now free. "My child," Sage wept, holding her tight. "You did it." "But Mother, she's gone," Brenna whispered, feeling the void where Isabel's spirit had been. "No, she isn't," Sage said, turning Brenna to face her own reflection in a warrior's polished shield. "She is part of you now. Look." Brenna stared at her reflection. Her eyes were still blue, but they were now flecked with shimmering silver specks, her mother's eyes. Cade came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "We can go home now," she said. "Home," he replied, his voice soft and certain, "is wherever you are." As they prepared to leave, Damien approached them, his usual arrogance gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "I was wrong about you. Thorn, you have earned the right to be queen." Cade smiled, tightening his hold on Brenna. "She will be." The journey back to Iron Peak felt different. The ever-present tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary relief. They stopped for a night at an old abandoned monastery that Sage recognized. "Your mother studied here long ago," she told Brenna. A strange pull led Brenna through the dusty library to a hidden chamber. In its center was a safe, sealed not with a lock, but with a blood magic ward. An inscription on it read, "Only the blood of Isabel shall pass." Brenna pricked her finger with her dagger. As a drop of her blood touched the seal, it dissolved with a soft hiss. The heavy door swung open. Inside was a single crystal, humming with stored energy, and a thick, leather-bound diary. Her mother's diary. With trembling hands, Brenna opened it. The last entry was dated the day before her execution. "Aldrich knows a part of the truth, but not all. He does not know about my daughter. He does not know she is the key. Victoria, whom I once called sister, has betrayed us all. She orchestrated this. She whispered lies to the king to get to me, to get to my bloodline. The prophecy of the soul fracture is real, but it is not a curse of fate. It is a weapon, forged by dark mages centuries ago to control the Ashford line. King Thaddeus, Aldrich's father, knew this. He came to me in secret. He knew his son was unstable, cruel. He feared what Aldrich would become. He begged me to create a failsafe, a way to break the cycle. Together, Thaddeus and I performed the blood binding. Our daughter, Brenna, would be the union of our lines, born with the power to mend the fracture and purify the royal bloodline. Son, Marcus, my beloved Marcus, agreed to raise her as his own, to love her and protect her. He knew the truth and loved me enough to share this burden. He will die with me tomorrow. We have agreed it is the only way to ensure no one ever looks for our child. Sage will take her, and I will seal her wolf, hiding her power and a piece of my own soul within her until the time is right. My dearest Brenna, my daughter, my hope, forgive me for the life of hardship you must walk, but know that you were not an accident of fate. You were a choice, a prayer for a better world. You were born to heal what is broken. You are our legacy. Brenna collapsed to the floor, the diary falling from her numb fingers. The world she knew had been built on a foundation of heroic, heartbreaking lies. Her parents hadn't just died. They had chosen to die. For her. Marcus wasn't her biological father, but he was her real father in every way that mattered. And her mother had sacrificed everything. Cade found her there, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. He saw the diary, the look on her face, and knelt beside her. "Brenna, what is it?" Wordlessly, she handed him the diary. He read it, his face growing paler with every word. I am the daughter of your grandfather," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and wrong. He looked up from the page, his amber eyes full of a fierce, unwavering love. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "You are the daughter of Marcus and Isabel Thorne," he said, his voice firm and absolute. "And you are the woman I love. Thaddeus was my grandfather, not my father. We share no blood that matters. Nothing changes. This changes nothing between us." And Brenna, looking into his eyes, knew he was right. Their bond was not forged by bloodlines or prophecies. It was forged in shared pain, in mutual sacrifice, and in a love that was strong enough to rewrite their destiny. The past had been unearthed, but their future was their own to build.